Hello and welcome to the 15-minute show, part of the Arsenal Therapy podcast. As always, I'm your host, Adam Keys, and please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. This channel is growing at a rapid rate, and we want to say a massive thanks to everyone that joins us every other day to do these tactical analysis shows. Today, we are going to discuss Benjamin White, Arsenal's number 4, and a man who's a Swiss Army knife at the back for Arsenal, a really unique profile, and someone that doesn't get the attention that he deserves. Because Ben's performances at Arsenal over the last couple of years have been sensational. So we are going to break down what he does, what he offers the team, his kind of ability to put the team before himself, and ultimately just bring something completely different and give Arteta something that he doesn't otherwise have. So firstly, we're going to look at kind of what other people have said about Ben. We're going to look at his heat maps. We're going to look at his numbers. We're going to look at the roles he does, and we're going to have a look at some match clips and see what he offers, what he's being asked to do by Mikel Arteta within this Arsenal team. Because Ben's a player who deserves a lot more credit and has played through injuries and has really put the team before himself. So first up, we're going to look at a quote from Carlos Cuesta that came during the Arsenal All or Nothing documentary about Ben White, which I think sums up everything that we know and love about Ben. And this quote is something that I think really applies more so than ever with his current role in the Arsenal team. So during a personal development session when the two of them were doing video analysis, Carlos Cuesta said to Ben, "Your level of activity is top. Your ability to learn is your biggest strength. I see you defend and I think, whoa, how aggressive he is, how quickly he reacts, and how he is able to anticipate. How many players in the world can anticipate like you? I can tell you, not many. I would say nobody. You're special on your level of activity." Now, Ben's level of defending, we know, is superb, but it's quite often his technical ability and his brain that allows him to adapt to the different things Arteta asks of him. And one of the really interesting things about Ben White is there are only a few players that Arteta has said, no, go and get them. I don't care about the price. I need this player. We all know Declan Rice was one of those players. Ben White was another. Ben White cost 50 million. There is that famous quote in All or Nothing, 50 million and you're shit. Everyone was saying it about Ben White. How are Arsenal paying 50 million for Ben White when Varane's available for 35? History has shown that Arsenal got the better deal there. Ben White has proven to be a tremendous signing, and at 26 years old, still has a huge capacity to learn and improve at Arsenal. So first up, we're going to look at what he was being asked to do over the last 18 months. So when he moved from centre-back to fullback, he had a big job to do. And one of the first things I noticed about Ben White was the difference in his body shape. He had to lose weight. He had to go from being an aggressive physical centre-back who anticipated well and played a lot of his game on the ball, but ultimately was going to be involved in a lot of aerial duels, to a fullback's body. And that meant losing weight, becoming more lean, and changing how you work on the pitch with agility, becoming a much, much bigger factor in your game. But these stats were taken in October, end of October to be precise, and it was right before Ben White's form dipped off when we heard that he was playing through an injury, and he had the most overlapping runs in the league. We saw last year only Estepinian at Brighton had more overlaps than Ben White, which is something that you wouldn't consider with him because he's not what you would think of as a real bombing fullback who gets up and down the line. He really picks his moment. He doesn't just run for the sake of it. He's someone that is there to receive at all times, whether it be as an overlap from Saka, whether it be from Odegaard, Rice, or whoever it is in midfield. He's always there to receive from Saliba or his goalkeeper. Ben White is a player that is there, has the technical ability to receive, and rarely loses the ball. He's someone with just real technical security, but also a real intelligence in his positioning, whether it be as an overlapper or as a defensive player that's taking the ball and getting his attackers to pass it back to him. And when we look at his heat maps, these are his heat maps before at the end of 2023. So we look at the Brighton game, all heavily congested down the right-hand side, overlapping, and getting down that pitch. We don't see him getting to the byline as often, but he is there. He has got moments. In this game, he was up against Matoma, who he's previously struggled against. And there was definitely a reluctance, particularly in the first half, to get forward as much, which is probably why you can see so much of it heavily congested outright and really hugging that touchline in his own half. And again, a lot of his attacking play is situated in the kind of the early entry into the final third. Against Liverpool, again facing Luis Diaz, this was a game where away from home, he was facing a tricky winger, but again, hugging the touchline, not coming forward as much. And this is where we saw Ben as well. He was clearly playing through something. He didn't look comfortable. Agility was a problem. And he looked like he was trying to own his zone and make sure he wasn't beaten as opposed to offering a lot. Again, we saw the same against West Ham. Very heavily congested in the area of the pitch outright. And this is a game where Arsenal had loads of the ball, loads of chances, and just couldn't put the ball in the back of the net. But it was Fulham where Ben really, really struggled. This was the point where people were saying Arsenal didn't have a good fullback, that Arsenal needed to improve in that area. And ultimately, it was a man, if you watched his performance, you could see the things that he did well for the previous 2 years, he wasn't able to do. And one of those big things was his ability to turn. He looked like a player that was anchoring himself to his position to ensure he wasn't beaten. And he was more adding that extra body than someone who was confident in their ability. He was also less willing to receive. His passing range was completely different to what we've seen. And ultimately, all the traits that we know and love about Ben White just weren't there. However, then we went to Dubai. He had a few weeks off. He clearly had a chance to recover from the injury that we had heard about. And Arteta changed his role. So we look at Forest was one of the first games because Zinchenko went off injured against Liverpool. So Ben White was asked to do something slightly different against Forest, which was coming in field and playing more in that inverted role. And you can see the change very quickly in the heat maps here. Against Forest, coming in field, starting to occupy that right half space. And he's very heavily congested in and around the right half space of the pitch, but he's still going out right. So this is why I've referred to Ben as a Swiss Army knife defender for Mikel Arteta. He's still overlapping. So in the way when Zinchenko plays that role, he plays very heavily in the center of the pitch in a double pivot with Declan Rice, and he adds that extra body. With Ben, he's being asked to do three roles at once. He's firstly being asked to be the overlapping fullback we've discussed. Now he's being asked to be an inverted fullback. And then finally, he is being asked to be that fourth defender in the way a Tomiyasu would, or in the way Man City play with four big bodies in there. So with this in mind, we see the changing and the kind of the evolution of his role. So against West Ham, he's coming more and more infield. A lot more of his game is coming into that middle of the pitch and adding that extra body, becoming the right-hand side midfielder, as Declan Rice is given license to drift slightly more left. In the way with Zinchenko on the pitch, Rice would occupy that right space in centre midfield. And but Rice very much sits in that sixth position alone. And against Burnley, again, we saw it. His one of his most heavily congested areas of the pitch is in centre midfield here. But again, in these games, he is going out to the touchline. He is occupying space, and we can see faint lines against Burnley of where he was overlapping. Against Porto, this is what's really interesting. Against Porto, he's having to cover right back down to almost to the touchline as a fullback getting back. Then he's occupying the space outright. He's going up forward as an overlapping fullback. We can see all that those yellow dots in and around the box where he is overlapping. And his most heavy congested area is in centre midfield as the inverted fullback. And a lot of this is down to his technical ability on the ball and his ability to receive and play in a double pivot. But when you look at Ben's his traits against the top five players in top five leagues in Europe, these are all defenders. Touches 82 percentile. Typically, it would be your centre backs that have the most touches. So if you look at Arsenal, Saliba and Gabriel frequently have the most touches, followed by Declan Rice. If you look at Liverpool, Van Dijk and Canary are very much up there. Man City, Nathan Ake is always up there with the most touches alongside Ruben Diaz. Rodri is consistently the players who it tends to be those players in the center of the pitch have the most touches. So for a fullback like Ben White to be that highly ranked for touches shows how involved he actually is in the first phase of Arsenal's build-up. He's now being more involved in the second phase, and still being asked to be involved in the third phase as an overlapping fullback, which is something that's completely unique and again shows his capacity to learn and how much he puts the team before himself. Again, aerial duels won. Typically, it'll be your centre backs in the top 20% here. I think Ben, given his height and his ability in the air, could be higher up here. Defensive actions, again, sometimes he is let down a bit by his one-on-one defending as a fullback and can get beaten by tricky wingers. So I would expect him to be slightly higher in his rankings here. And same with chances created, given how often he is overlapping. So first off, let's have a look at his overlapping. So the first graphic you see at the top here is West Ham. This is the game I talked about him struggling and looking like he wasn't the same player. So this happened repeatedly in the game where Saka got the ball and Ben White was coming to receive it, but he was staying quite a bit away from Saka. And when he was getting it, he was playing a safe pass into Saliba. He's playing it to Declan Rice. He wasn't offering that overlap. And this happened repeatedly through the game where Saka was forced to play that ball back because if he beat one man, he had multiple players. And we know Saka isn't the kind of winger who repeatedly beats his man. He's not that tricky winger. Saka's a magician who gets the ball into the right areas time and time again, doesn't need to beat his man. He's an output player. He's a linking player. He's someone who is about goals and assists. He's not about tricks and flicks. And in this game, Ben White's inability to get forward really gave Arsenal the inability to draw that man away from Saka. But then we see the complete contrast in the game against West Ham. And as I've said, you've seen his heat map. Ben White was playing a lot of his football inside the pitch, in that double pivot, in that inverted fullback role. But here, Saka gets the ball. He's got the option to play it into Odegaard, which he does. However, Ben White's overlap and run takes the man away, frees up that space, and gives Saka the option to play a very simple pass into Odegaard that otherwise, had White not have been there, those five defenders that are sitting in around that area of the box, they just sat still. They would have just sat and waited for Saka to either get a cross in, which again, you can see how heavily congested the box is, or he would have had to try and beat his man or play it back out. So these runs really offer something different. But again, you see as his rules changing now, this is against Burnley. Ball for Saka's goal, which Odegaard plays through, we see Ben White's playing in midfield. Again, previously, he would have been overlapping on Saka. He'd have been coming around the outside. And sometimes, if you listen to someone like Adrian Clark, who was a winger back in his day, he said there are times when a fullback will overlap you and you think, get away from me, you're just drawing the extra man. And this is what could actually help benefit Saka. If White is playing more into the middle of the pitch and more as an inverter, he is someone that might get more space, but at the same time, with Ben White also overlapping, it gives that unpredictability that Arteta's talked about. But very few players have the athletic ability, the intelligence, and the technical ability to do all three of these roles. And again, we see Arsenal in the build-up. Ben White's dropped in between Saliba and Declan Rice here. Saliba's pushing out right and covering that big right-hand side of the pitch in the way Gabriel previously did with the left when Zinchenko was playing. And this is to enable Arsenal to play with Kiwior in the team. Kiwior's now got a bit of rhythm in his boots. He's now playing at a level that we saw from him last season, but he's clearly not comfortable being an inverted fullback. It's a very, very complex role, and he's not an overly experienced player. So with someone like Ben White, he's got the experience along with the intelligence, athleticism, and technical ability that I previously said to play this role. And Saliba is now having to adapt to cover in a much bigger space with Gabriel occupying that centre-back role. And then again, if you look at the build-up here, Gabriel and Saliba, very much those two defenders playing right at the back by themselves. And then you've got White, Rice, and Kiwior. Kiwior goes forward as an overlapper, touchline defender, and is giving Arsenal a lot of width, while Ben White joins the build-up as a midfielder in a double pivot with Declan Rice. But again, you see in the same game, these are two actions within the same phase of play. Firstly, the one on the top left, he is going forward as a traditional modern fullback, where he's going down the line, for that big run. Saka's dropped in, created the space for him, and Ben White's going down the touchline for the run to dribble it forward. Arsenal ultimately lose the ball. Where's Ben White going? Straight back into the middle of the pitch to give Declan Rice that space as we've won it back. So, again, we've got Gabriel on the ball here, or Kivior possibly. Rice is looking for it, and the dotted line is where Ben White actually runs to, because Arteta likes his inverted fullback to be 5 yards away from his whoever's on the ball in midfield, always given that option. But what people don't always think about is what you need to be the receiver in that position. It's quite often congested. You can get the ball flung at you. You also receive the ball when it's broken or it's loose. You need supreme technical ability to be able to deal with the ball coming at you in that way. And then we look at his defensive positioning. Again, out of position, we've looked at how he drops into midfield. And again, depending on where we are on the pitch, Ben White does go into that double pivot and offer us that extra man in midfield to break up transitions, which we will discuss in a minute. But when we're out of position and it gets into our defensive third, look at how Arsenal line up. It's a straight back four, very, very traditional. All four players are in a line here, and this is a chance Porto should have scored. White, you can see in the first graphic at the top right, he has a check over his shoulder. He knows where his man is. Again, Arsenal get into the box. White checks over his shoulder, still aware of where he is. The man runs. White is still aware. He follows him. Saliba switches off. Ultimately, Porto get a shot in, hits the post. Rebound goes wide. Should have scored. But again, this is Ben White's anticipation and awareness. And for once, it was William Saliba that switched off in the box. And it's Saliba is also doing a different role. So basically, our four defenders are all doing a very different role. But Ben White is doing an extremely different role as a result of the change of positioning. And again, we look at it when I talk about him having to go back and play in that flat back four against Burnley, playing against a fast winger down the left. He straight away has to get back and cover that defensive third out wide. And here he does very well. He shuts out the light, makes sure that Burnley can't go for the cutback. And instead, they have to play a cross shot into the goal, which Raya makes a good save from. You wouldn't expect him not to save it. But it's a result of Ben White ensuring that he can't go down the line or he can't cut it back to a better option. And his only option is to hit it on his weaker foot. And ultimately, Raya palms it away and Arsenal get out. Again, we look at going forward. So this is what I've talked about with transitions. So Ben White, this is one phase of play here against West Ham. Ben White is up. He's in around the box. He's overlapped Saka. And ultimately, Arsenal lose the ball. So he is in this very attacking role, which we don't see Zinchenko in that often. But we are still seeing Ben White in a lot. Then Arsenal lose the ball. First to win it on is Ben White. He's alive to the danger. So this is what people don't always get about inverted fullbacks. The reason Pep Guardiola loves inverted fullbacks so much is because in possession, it gives you another option in a double pivot, a player who's there to receive in possession and can really give you that extra pressure and allow you to retain the ball much more effectively than you otherwise would have been able to. However, it's the out of possession thing that people don't look at. Out of possession, an inverted fullback gives you an extra man that allows you to stop the transition in its track. And that's exactly what Ben White's done here. If it wasn't for White in this position, it would be on Declan Rice to cut this ball out. And again, that leaves the man free and someone else has to pick that man up. With the inverted fullback, you win the ball high up the park, you stop the transition early, and you're ultimately able to recycle and re-go at the opposition and keep that pressure alive. And this is the way teams smother other teams, especially top teams like Arsenal and Man City, against teams in the bottom half of the table. And Ben White is such an aggressive dueler. He's someone that wins the ball extremely well. And Zinchenko wins a lot of these balls high up the park. Zinchenko is often beaten with the ball over his head. And we know Zinchenko doesn't always have the legs to get back. But we know that he is someone that he gives Arsenal the opportunity to win these duels. And a lot of what Ben White's doing now is a benefit from playing in midfield during his days at Leeds under Marcelo Bielsa, who again is a highly, highly organized positional coach. But Ben White doesn't just offer the things on the ball and off the ball for Arsenal. He's a huge asset in set pieces for us. We can see against West Ham, he caused havoc for them. Arsenal scored 2-headed goals, and Ben White was in and around the keeper the whole game. We've seen it time and time again that White blocks the keeper or blocks one of the defenders. And look, this is all within the rules of the game. He can do it. He can stand there. He's not actually touching them. And he learned from Leicester where he did grab the keeper's arm, and he just stands in the way. He just gets himself in front of the keeper. But teams have cottoned on to this. We see against Burnley, to protect James Trafford, who really suffered against Arsenal at home, Burnley literally threw Ben White to the ground and probably should have had grounds for a penalty here, because as you can see, the defender's not looking at the ball. He's got his back to play, and Ben White is being blocked off. We see the same against Porto, where Varela, 2 arms around Ben White, I'm not letting you near my keeper. And Porto did a great job at protecting Diogo Costa, who was excellent with his high claims and really did a good job at shutting out Arsenal's set-piece threat. However, we still could have scored a couple of goals from set pieces. But the set pieces are something that we've talked about a lot, but what people don't always consider with set pieces is throw-ins. We see this same throw-in action from Ben regularly. It's a kind of lofted ball over the top where Arsenal get into the box and really beat a batch of 4 or 5 players. We first saw it against Sevilla. So top left graphic, Ben White plays in Havertz over the top, and again, driving into the box. We saw it against Man City. Jesus gets in between the 2 defenders here, dribbles into the box. It led to nothing on both these occasions, but it causes real threat. Against Luton, we see it again here. And Ben White into Odegaard. We saw it against Burnley. This happens on a regular basis. And Ben White has got the ability and capacity to take long throw-ins, but also medium length lofted throws like this, and really give Arsenal that extra threat. So this is again why I refer to him as a Swiss Army knife. You've got the corners where he causes havoc in there. You've got the throw-ins. You've got the inverting, the overlapping, and the 4th defender as a centre-back playing that very much, that solid state defending, very old school, very flat line. We're going to see it out. And that's something that's incredibly unique. But just looking at Ben's numbers this year compared to last year, because he has been criticised and people have said he hasn't been as good this year, his touches are up. He's having to make less recovery. He's losing possession roughly the same amount, so 11.9 to 12. He is creating more chances. He's making more passes. His passing accuracy has also increased. He's attempting more long passes, although his accuracy is very, very marginally down. Again, those big switches, he's got the capacity to be that quarterback for Arsenal that other players don't have. We look at his defensive numbers. He's conceding less fouls. He's also making more interceptions, more blocks. His aerial duel success rate has gone up. The only thing he was doing again last season is making more tackles. He was also contesting more aerial duels, which would again feed into the fact that Arsenal are better off the ball this year and better organised. But ultimately, look, these are all traits that go into making Ben White the player that he is and such a great asset for Arsenal to have. This is someone who, if he can stay fit and stay at this level, he is just going to continue to get better. We've seen what he offers, and we've seen just an incredible asset to Arsenal. We also have to look at the sacrifices he made for the team by playing through those injuries. And ultimately, we owe Ben White a lot of thanks in that regard. Yes, his form dipped, but he gave us something at a time when we really needed it. So, yeah, if you've got any questions, please drop them in the chat. And look, thank you to everyone that's joined. Please hit the like button on this video. Please subscribe to the channel, and we will join you again on Tuesday for another 15-minute show. And of course, please check into the main pod, which you can find on Apple and Spotify. Thank you.